The 25 billion is the financing that we provide through our lending. So that's at the availability of the governments that implement the projects. Well, the World Bank is a poverty alleviation agency. That's our main goal, and we do that by two means. One is projects. So we finance projects. It's not our projects, these are government projects all around the world focused towards poverty alleviation. And the second is through advice to governments on how to make better policies for the poor. We have, our lending is about $25 billion a year, which is no longer that big compared to the private flows, but it's still significant in a number of countries, especially the poorest countries that don't get much money from the capital market. So there, in those poor countries, we're still quite significant. In China, we do $1.5 billion of lending every year, which is still one of our bigger clients. It's no longer the biggest, still one of our bigger clients, but of course in the grand scheme of things in China it's still fairly small. Globally we do a lot of health and education projects. We do quite a bit of infrastructure projects. That's where a lot of the money goes because these are usually more expensive than social sector. Increasingly we do environmental projects, local environmental issues such as water pollution and air pollution, but also global issues such as global warming and CO2 reduction. We implement part of the clean development mechanism under the Kyoto Protocol. So that's one of our financing sources, if you want, to help finance projects in developing countries. On the emerging economy side, and if you want, the middle-income countries, as we call them, we increasingly move to advisory services. Lending is less important there. It's still a bit important for us because we're a bank in the end and we want to do some business as well. We need to live by our bottom line, but in general our impact is less through money as it is more through ideas. Even though some of these ideas are really wrapped together with the projects that we do. So building new institutions, say a new social safety net in Brazil, or a health card system in Nigeria, or to give a couple of examples, there's still new ideas that we help implement through financing alone. In China, in general, for quite a long time, we found that by and large the private sector could finance a lot of infrastructure, notably power generation or other things. But in China we continue to finance it, in part because China was quite different. It started with had a very different type of reform program. But in the past, when in most other countries had already moved out, we were still financing in China. So we were quite flexible there. But there are certain things, and the ideology also changes, if you want, or the thinking also changes. What is quite appropriate for some phases where there's abundant private capital that seeks investment opportunities in developing countries. That's very different from situations where there's a drought of private investment flowing into developing countries, and we've seen them all over the last 25 years. Right after the Latin American debt crisis, private capital or international private capital hardly flow to developing countries, so the World Bank's role became more expanded, even in sort of areas where traditionally private finance took a higher role. Nowadays, there's quite a bit of an abundance of capital, and so in many emerging countries or middle-income countries, World Bank financing in more market-oriented projects are less needed. Nevertheless, there's still a whole range of countries, especially among the poorest and especially in Africa, that don't receive private financing. So for all kinds of other reasons, for more broadly creditworthiness reasons. So even if you want the private sector to finance, they won't move in. So there the World Bank has a role. The 25 billion is the financing that we provide through our lending. So that's at the availability of the governments that implement the projects. For the World Bank itself, if we look at our administrative budget on how we use our administrative resources, people, how we use our people, sort of in terms of lending, in terms of portfolio management, making sure that the money is well spent, that's called portfolio management, and then advisory services, that's very roughly, and don't hold me to the number, but very roughly about one-third, one-third, one-third. So one-third in new lending and project preparation, one-third in portfolio management, making sure that procurement rules are followed, making sure that financial management is correct, making sure that the audits are done, etc. And then advisory services and studies and advisory services for government, about one-third. That's at least how the China program broadly looks.